Hello, and welcome to Trekkie and Beyond, a Star Trek podcast. I'm Moneca.
And I'm Andrea, and welcome to episode 3 of season 2 of Strange New Worlds. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. This episode is all about La'an, and she travels back to the 21st century on Earth to prevent an attack that would alter humanity's future. And sort of brings her face to face with the beginning of the legacy that she hates. And there's also a little bit of a love interest happening with a version of a captain that we all know and love, Captain Kirk. So let's get into it. Initial reactions. My co-host is already shaking her head no.
Because first of all, not all of us love that captain. Many of us know of Captain Kirk, but not all of us love him. But I felt like this was an old trope and of a time-traveling assassin. So I give it a meh because it's not an original story. And it's hard to come out of the gate right after the last episode, which was very much so an original story and had so many just amazing acting and much more touching story for me. It didn't travel to any strange new worlds. There was no first contact, so I give it a meh.
I mean, like, technically, there was, if you want to stretch the truth.
Stretch the truth. I mean, come on.
Because they came into contact with people who have never met an alien before. And technically, that James T. Kirk was not born on Earth. So he's technically an alien. Just saying.
Leon was not born on Earth.
Yes, she wasn't born on Earth. So it was a first contact of a knowing first contact. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. We're down that hill.
The past.
I actually loved this episode. I noticed a theme though whenever we see Captain Kirk, and I have to say the reason I love my James T. Kirk is not because of the original series. It's because of the Star Trek movies, and I love the way Chris Pine brought James T. Kirk to life in like a more appealing package, I should say, for me. So I have a special spot in my heart for his like craziness. So I like seeing him. But I also have noticed that we only really see him in leadership roles in an alternate universe. This is I think the second or third time we've seen him in Strange New Worlds. And the last time we saw him was an alternate universe of Pike. When he altered the future, we saw James T. Kirk like in a fighting stance with the Romulans, like ready to attack. And then this time we see him again when he's like facing the Romulans again. So we see this version of a James T. Kirk always when someone changes the future. So I look forward to like meeting that version of him without the war. So neither here nor there. That's our initial reaction before we get too deep into it, because I know we have a lot to discuss and to disagree on. But let's go ahead into our deeper dive. What did you think of like the opening sequence of La'an's almost monotonous, is that the word? And repetitive morning where she sort of feels like her job is just to stop squabbles happening between people on the ship, between a transport person and ensign thinking that the transport stole something from him, Spock having a noise complaint put against him, and then her fighting the doctor, just sort of trying to go through the motions. What did you think?
Well, with the initial viewing, I knew that they were setting something up because we were just hearing her complain. I really liked the scene between M'Benga and La'an because it gave us more of a narrative about what's going on. He asked her about, does she feel lonely because she's the only person that survived from, I think, a battle that she was in with the Gorn. And then we find out a lot more about her anxiety with being lonely and having a hard time connecting with humans. But and I was able to connect more of that in the second viewing of the episode. So the fight scenes again with M'Benga are always on point for me, and it's cool to see how officers in Starfleet work out their stresses, whether it's lifting weights like in Lower Decks, or kickboxing and other things like that. It's nice to see them off the bridge doing other things to decompress.
I have to say, I did like the little bit of the everyday life that we get to see that we don't always get to see on the Enterprise. They're in space, and oh, you misplaced your watch. The transporter thing must have stolen it from me. Spock using the heart as a way of like controlling his stress was like a callback back to an earlier episode, and someone's complaining about Spock's heart play. I liked the little glimpse of everyday life on the ship, even though for La'an it was very boring and it was something that she's just like, why is this my life? It's still nice to see how they are in between go, 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 you know? And I love those little snippets. I don't like an entire episode of seeing their like everyday life, but seeing it like sort of just like a little piece here, a little piece there, I think is a really nice thing. And then also we get to see a little bit more of our new Enterprise member, Pelia, how she has all these little knickknacks that are very old. And she states, after being alive for such a long time, I expect you not to, how do you not become a pack rat and keep a little bit of everything? And how she has famous paintings that the Louvre still wants back.
She says it's fake.
She says it's a fake, but the Louvre would like it back. And how everything is tagged to the archaeology department. And how do you check if she did or did not work there? Because if someone has been alive for hundreds of thousands of years, possibly, we know at least over 200 or 300 years, that they have all these historical artifacts that, yes, at this point seem very important, but at one point they could have just been, oh, this is a paperweight for me at one point, and now it's historically important. So how do you tell someone, no, it does, like you need to give it back? Maybe she did own it. Maybe. What do you think? What did you think of that part, little snippet?
Oh, I really appreciate that after the rewatch, because we find out that she had an antique store.
Yes.
And so she could have been collecting that over the centuries.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to remember the name of that.
It was called the archaeology department.
Oh, see, so
it was her little play on words. Like, I worked there.
Right. So, yeah. So she was checking all the boxes. So it makes me think more and more about her, the reason why she joined Enterprise initially.
And then we also get our little jump into like what's going on, what the whole meat of this episode is. And we see this man in a gray suit just sort of like come out of nowhere on Enterprise. He's shot by a bullet, which does not happen in the future. And gives La'an a like little device that says you have to get to the bridge, and like basically dies. I've noticed with Starfleet, whenever there's like a time issue, it's always that one person that knows the truth and everyone else thinks they're crazy. And when we meet this new Captain Kirk, we see a lot of the same people on the ship, on the bridge, but we also know, like, we learned that it's not Starfleet anymore, it's the United Earth Fleet. That they're not friends with the Vulcans, that Spock is like a captain of his own ship in his own right. He needs help. He's begging for help. Apparently Earth doesn't help no one, which I feel like is a callback to Discovery, when like in the future Earth sort of like closed off and was only about Earth itself. That part of the episode was a lot of little Easter eggs and little nuggets of information that was like, oh, Spock, you're supposed to be on the Enterprise. Like how one little change really, whatever that change is, because at the point we don't really know what the change is, how one little change changed so much to the Vulcans, who were the people who first introduced Earth to space, really. They're not friends, and the Vulcans are losing a war against the Romulans, and Spock is like their last stronghold, well, their last holdout. That huge of a change from something that could be considered a small little action. What did you think?
So this is, as you mentioned, the first time we see this Kirk. And so it reminds me of why I don't like him. Because his initial reaction to her was, who are you and what are you doing on my ship? Right. And not call security. It didn't seem like there was other things. And I feel like they're it was a good opportunity to do something, because she was still standing in the background while he was having the conversation with Spock. And I was thinking, if you're really going to have this diplomatic conversation with the Vulcans who have disputes right now with the Romulans, then maybe the stranger should not be on a bridge. I question Kirk's dry humor, his judgment all the time. I'm not the biggest fan of him, as you can tell, but these are reasons why. And he said sly things about Pelia later. To me, his character has these lines that I wonder if he would say the same thing around male characters in those same roles. And so I just picked that up time and time again. And then also his whole kiss him and leave him kind of thing. So
Kirk is a woman. Like, the one thing, like, the relationships, like, leadership aside, Kirk has always been, like, every version of him I've ever met has been a ladies' man. This man likes the ladies. So
that's what I don't like. So no matter who plays that role, whichever actor's in that, I don't like that.
So, like, I get it. I do. I get it. I mean, but, like, also, he doesn't owe her anything at this point. Like, he doesn't owe her. He doesn't, like, this. Like, even though we know La'an is correct, Kirk has grown up in the world where, like, his Earth. We learned in this episode, like, his Earth no longer, like, is in ruins. They no longer have sunsets. Like, when they go back into the past, he doesn't even know what, like, a city looks like, because he's never seen one. He's never been, which is also very interesting. It's called the United Earth Fleet, and Earth isn't in the fleet. Like, they colonized the moon, Mars, Europa, and, like, Jupiter, but, like, they're not actually from Earth because Earth is in ruins. So it's like, it's a whole, not like saying his actions are 100% like correct, but, like, he wasn't raised in a utopia. He was raised in war. So, like, he's a lot more hardened. He's a lot probably more sure of himself than the Kirk we are normally used to. So, because even when everyone on the bridge turned around, our friendly O'Hara and everyone, they all had, like, these sort of, like, who she thinks she is walking onto this bridge like this look on their face. And so it's like, I view him as a version of himself who grew up in a lot more hostile territory with an Earth that does not offer assistance to anyone. So, like, he's not going to handle it like Starfleet, because she's wearing a Starfleet uniform. There is no Starfleet where he's from. He can like, they may have different ways of handling things than Starfleet did, because they're not Starfleet.
Oh yeah, and we can talk about this opening scene for another 15 minutes. However, what I want to point out, and my last point on this, is really that Kirk is known for making decisions for the entire ship, not bringing the ship in together to make decisions. And it's like, this is the captain's way. And I feel as though, like, he did that in this scene. He didn't bring other members of the crew. And maybe this is the way, obviously, this is the way United Earth Fleet works. But I don't like that type of captain. I would have appreciated it if he brought in whoever the new Leanne, whoever security is, and let's sit at a round table together and talk it out really quickly, like for 5 minutes.
I understand your point, but I also can see that he doesn't have to, because he's the captain.
Oh yeah.
So it's like, he doesn't have to bring anyone else in.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He could have sent her directly to the bridge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in this part, we're all going to just sort of talk about the main meat of the episode, which is sort of hard to sort of break into smaller parts, because it all sort of just sort of happens all at once. But we see that Kirk and La'an go back in time. And I just have to say, unless she saw, like, a newspaper or something that said this was Toronto, I would have believed it was New York before it was believed it was Toronto.
There are great big billboards that stated Toronto, like Toronto Center.
I didn't see it. I did not see it.
I saw them.
I was like, how did she know this was Toronto? Because she looked at, like, this is Toronto. Unless, like, you live in Toronto, that is not an obvious city. And the only reason I would say New York, because I feel like they would do like a bigger city. But like even that, I mean, I thought they were doing like a random version of like Times Square because it didn't look like Times Square, but neither here nor there. I was just like, there's no way. Without the billboards, you didn't know that was Toronto. Without like, because
you're absolutely right. I wouldn't have known. However, I think she's more observant because in the two fish out of water scenes that they're both in or experiences, she has more of a connection because at least she's been to Earth.
That's true. That is true.
And so she knows cities, and maybe for Kirk, he's like, every city's like New York. He's only read about them or seen them in holograms. So it's a completely different experience. He's never even seen a sunset, right? In the sky. So like that.
That's like so sad. Kirk, you need a hug. I'll give you a hug.
There's the reason why we have to take care of our planet, Earth.
This episode was very. So I have to say, like, the build up of this episode, we get to see them, get clothes that fit the time. We see the little fun thing of how they both sort of like think alike. They picked out the exact same outfit, and Kirk is like, "Fine, I'll change into something else." We see La'an's like, "Oh wait, I'm attracted to this person." Like we see the first little instance of. Because I will admit, I wasn't expecting any type of romance in this episode. I thought they would be like enemy, like just sort of like reluctant friends, like an odd couple, where you're just like, okay, these guys are the opposite of each other, but they just work. They're just really good friends. But when she had her reaction to his body, I was like, oh, so we're going on that note for this episode. Interesting, because we don't really get to see that with La'an. We see her a lot lighter than season 1, but still, she does not give off the era of I find other people interesting enough to find them attractive.
Right, because in the episode in which they were shore leave time, she stayed on the ship.
Yeah.
Right? And she was going through, I think, like Enterprise bingo or something like that.
Yeah.
So she wasn't interested in mixing and mingling and dating. Like Nurse Chapel had set up a rendezvous. She wasn't interested in any of that.
Yeah.
It's all about work for her.
So it's like very interesting in this one where it's all about work, and she notices like, oh, okay, look at that body, you look good. We also see that they have to find some place to live or like stay in the future. Kirk hustles chess.
Right, and we learn that he has some street smarts there.
Yes.
Right.
And you always need someone who has there's street smarts and there's like book smart. And La'an is like book smart, and but she doesn't understand everyday interactions on the street. And Kirk, even though he's not from Earth and like has never been on Earth, he has a lot more street smarts. And I think it comes back to the way he was raised to like never really trust anyone who's not from Earth, Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting, that dynamic between them.
He has much better interpersonal skills.
So much more. And then we also see while they're sleeping, she gets up and like gazes at him. And I'm like, what? One, I didn't really get the point of that scene because if nothing was going to happen, what was the point of it? And then we also see Kirk opens his eyes because he realized she's staring at him. And then when she walks away, he looks at her and it's like, oh, 2 trains in the night miss their connections. Like they just miss each other. Okay, whatever. And we also see that Kirk is, in the very beginning of this episode, doesn't really want to help her win, because at this point he doesn't really want his future to be erased because he doesn't want to be erased. And it's not until La'an has to like lets him know, well, you do exist in my world. I know your brother said a lot of stories about you. He's like, his brother's alive. And for him, that's almost like the switch that needs to be flipped. And it's like, all right, I want your world to happen because I want my brother to be alive. And then the bridge blows up. And that's when he means get to the bridge. Now, I'm going to be super honest. I picked out who our bad guy was the second that person came onto screen. Did you guess at the same time?
No.
So the only reason I knew that person was a bad guy is because I knew that girl as an actress. And I was like, she's too high known just to be some random bystander in this episode. It's her. She's the bad guy.
Well, before we jump to that, I want to go back to the bridge exploding because the time traveler guy in the gray suit that we end up finding out is the part of the Department of Temporal Investigations, he told her to go to the bridge. And so I think she was thinking about the Enterprise bridge, but he was really talking about this. And what a coincidence that their hotel room was right across from the bridge in clear sight, and they could hear it. so they could see the explosion and the fire. I was just thinking it would have been bigger because a bridge exploding, they would have blocked off more. But but they were able to get pretty close considering.
Yeah, I was like, oh, they got real close. But yeah, no, I knew she was the bad person in the very beginning because I've seen her act in other things, and I was like, she's too well-known-ish of an actress, to just be some random person. Like,
yeah, because at first she was a photographer, and I was like, okay, that's kind of random. But then when she followed him after the chase scene, and she was there live streaming, I was like,
or quote unquote,
there's a little bit more, right? There's a little bit more to her character because of the fact that she had traveled with them so quickly out of everything else that was going on in the city at that time.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, why did she know to follow them? Like, that's interesting. We also see that, so we find out that the bridge explosion happened in both timelines, both La'an's and Kirk. So she knows the bridge has to blow up. So that's not the thing they were sent here to fix. It's whatever came afterwards. And she realizes that the bridge was blown up from a device from the future because it's like a photon bomb, she said. And that is like, okay, we need to figure out who blew it up and stop them from doing anything else. And she realizes, Kirk remembers something from the past. He's like, I remember what happened in Toronto in a couple of days is about to be wiped out from existence, from a cold fusion bomb being blown up. And La'an's like, that didn't happen in my world. And so they both realize that is the defining moment that diverges their timeline. And they need to find an engineer. I have to say, I really did love when she was like, we have to go to Vermont, and I knew where she was going. I was like, that doesn't necessarily mean she's an engineer yet. Like, she is an engineer for Starfleet now, but she's also had a lot of life to be a lot of different things. Why would she be a Starfleet engineer over 100 years in the past, you know?
Yeah.
But it was so fun. It was so great to see a familiar face, and Pila. And we get to see some of the same artifacts that we saw on the ship is in her her archaeology department. And she was still able to help them with that watch that was able to track where I would glow if it came into contact with tritium from the cold fusion bomb. So she was still able to help. But in my mind, I was like, La'an, why did you think she was an engineer in this world? Starfleet doesn't exist yet. So how could she be an engineer for Starfleet and have the same knowledge before they existed? So that was sort of a stretch, but it was still interesting. What did you think?
I'm glad that Pila shared that information that she had lived so long so that then Leon could follow up. But I think was the only clue that she had at that period of time, and she was grasping at straws to try to figure it out. I think once they get to the fact that they have the watch and they're like roaming around the city trying to figure out when it's going to glow, like that, they lost me there. Like it could be anywhere.
A better way. Like we've been walking for hours. Oh, another little tidbit is we find out is La'an's name isn't infamous in Kirk's future because he mispronounces it. And when she corrects him, she realizes no one knows, like he doesn't know her last name, and everyone knows her last name, which is also like, why didn't y'all just change our last name? Like, at one point, does your parents not just say, we're going to be known as something else. Like, we don't want to be connected. Like, we can't change our DNA, but we can like we can go by a different last name.
Also, she had a fresh start. She was the only survivor from that Gorn ship. So, from that Gorn attack. So she could have started with a new life, new name, completely new identity.
Like, why would you? I would have changed my last name, like, in a heartbeat. But neither here nor there. We see a little moment happen between Kirk and La'an when, like, she's trying to explain to him about why her name is infamous, in her future, and she brings up the Scarlet Letter and like the Mark of Cain, and he plays along like he doesn't know what those things are in his timeline, and then they kiss, and I'm not mad that they kissed. I just felt like it was very awkward. Because, like, you're walking around, like, I felt like if they had kissed back in, like, the hotel room or whatever, I feel like that might have been a little bit more appropriate. But it was just like, this is not the time or place for either of you guys. Like, Kirk, you just said Toronto's going to explode. Like, like, you're literally walking around for a cold fusion, like looking for a cold fusion bomb. Is now really the time to kiss? And I get that she sort of tells him like people are hard for her, but he's not, like, she gets along with him, so he's not hard. Like, it's weird for her to connect with him like on this level so quickly. And I get that and I understand that. But honey, a bomb is ticking. Like, you don't know what's going to make it explode. So, like, keep working to find it. Ain't no time to kiss.
Right. You know, I know, and the rest of the listening audience knows how you feel about Spock and Nurse Chapel and how they should be a platonic relationship. Yes. I feel is the same way here. I feel like this wasn't needed, this budding romance. They could have just been two I can't say Starfleet, but it's two officers helping to to resolve the situation, to correct the timeline. They didn't need to be distracting away from the mission at hand.
No, you are 100% correct. I would have loved them to stay the odd couple. But they were a great odd couple and they were a great duo and a great friend. So it's like when they kiss, even though it's like, okay, yes, I see the chemistry between you two. I see the butterflies forming, but this is time and place. Time and place. This is not the time or the place. But we also see them. But they get past that point. They realize the watch is glowing, and they find the fusion bomb. And we meet the bad chick from the beginning, who is actually a Romulan, who has been trapped on Earth for 30 years, trying to create the future where Romulans win. So she's trying to create the future that Kirk has, where the Romulans are like destroying everyone. And Kirk, I don't know why he said he thought she was bluffing. Like, the chick is not human. She doesn't care if she kills you. So Kirk dies, which sort of sucks because like La'an was just like, I'm going to bring you to my world with me. No, you can't do that, La'an. You can't do that. So he dies, which sucks and it's sad. And then, first of all, I think that that building needed a lot more security.
Yes,
like 2 security guards, and she was already at like the genetic laboratory.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure because they glanced completely over this how they got into the facility to walk then down the corridor to scan a hand, and then also
opened it.
But how did they get there? They were in a building to get to the point.
Oh, that's true. Did it glow brighter as y'all walked closer? That wasn't really explained either.
Right, and that shouldn't have been the only level of security that was there at the entire facility. And then also how Sarah tracked them to get to. I guess Sarah knew though, because Sarah had been traveling in time for a while. I think she said this is the 30th time that she's tried this simulation. So
yeah, she's been trapped there since 1992 to like get her shot at this. So she's been there she's been trapped on Earth for 30 years. because she's trying to eliminate Khan. I guess maybe all the security went to the bomb, the Code Fusion bomb, thinking she would head to the Code Fusion bomb and not protect the other little, like the genetic laboratory. And La'an finds out that she's trying to kill Khan, the originator, who was the mass murderer, who was like the part of the genetic war that the Earth fought.
And more importantly, her ancestor.
So when she's like, he did all of these things, but he's also a part of me. Like, I'm a part of him. I can't kill him because then I die. Like, and then the Romulan Sarah even tells her, you have the thing that keeps you safe. I can kill him and no one will ever know your name. And La'an doesn't do it. And I'll be super honest, I was expecting to meet like a grown man. Were you expecting to meet a grown man like who had a wife and kids or something like that? Yes. And then like when La'an defeats Sarah and Sarah like basically does her suicide thing to make sure like no one can like track her body or whatever, we go in and her ancestor is a child. So that's like one that sort of changes the perspective of him, because I was thinking this is about to be a grown man who's doing all these things, but you see the sign like where they walk through, it says genetic laboratory. This little boy is being experimented on. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, I don't know if La'an knew that. I don't think she knew this like the way, like, is it nature or nurture? I think this point is nurture, because he was raised to be a genetic experiment.
Yes, and he was one of like 7 others. There was a few other kids in that photo.
And so it's like, interesting. That sort of changed the perspective for La'an to also maybe come to terms that she's not a monster. Like, the monster was made. Like, maybe it's not just in her genes to be evil. Someone like turned her ancestor into this, because even he was like, can you take me away from this? Are you here to take me away? Like, he doesn't want to be there. He, like, the little boy doesn't want to be there. And it also makes you think, what happens if she did take him away from there? And started, like, gave him to a loving family. Maybe the whole genocides would have never happened. Like, she could be a completely different person in the future. So many different ways this could have gone. I would have taken him out. Screw the future. You ain't experimenting on my ancestor. Like, I'm sorry. No. I will take not being here for his happiness. Like, no, leave them alone. He's a child.
Yes. So this has been a trope, from the fish out of water to time travel and time assassin. But I think it was an opportunity missed when Leanne and Kirk were with Pelia. Mm-hmm. Most of the time in time travel, they bring the person who was there in that time with them to the next journey, the next leg in the trip. And so, because that person has a knowledge base of that time period and some of the other logistics. So if they would have brought her along, then maybe she could have also helped get Khan back to, I don't know, a loving family or mm-hmm. something like that. And if it was a what if, and if I could change this story a bit, I would cut out the kissing scene to save some time so that Pelia can continue along through that journey to possibly change the ending a little bit.
So I agree and disagree with that statement, because I agree because yes, like, bringing her to take him away also, but like La'an had to know that he was there. So like, she didn't know that he was there. So it's like so bringing Pelia with them also maybe brings Pelia's death if they fell. Mm. Because like Pelia was never in Toronto during that time. And so if they fell and Toronto explodes, Pelia dies. But right. At the same time, like, hey, Pelia, this organization is holding my like ancestor hostage. I have to dip. Come get him. He's like, here's his location. Do what you got to do. Stop him from becoming a mass murderer. That I would have liked. So I feel like she would have been smart enough to figure it out. But
right. If she was sitting in the away the getaway vehicle outside.
like outside of Toronto or something. Because like
Right.
the whole city.
She dropped them off, right,
Yeah.
and she's waiting outside the city.
So it's like she can't be there to save the kid if they didn't know the kid was there. But it's like they save the kid, like save the cheerleader, save the world, save the kid, stop a war. Like,
right.
So she's like, I would have left a message like, stop this from happening, please. Let me
but
see
the way Sarah explained it, if Khan died, then the Romulans would have been able to control the galaxy, because also humanity would have been like not as powerful.
Yeah, they're trying to stop humanity from furthering, so that way they can take control when the time is right. But like if Khan survives, but he's a force for good, that could have been like even a better thing for the future,
right,
than him either dying or just being a force for evil. I think La'an should have sent a message to Pelia and was like, hey, I need you to kidnap my great ancestor. Here's where he is. We saved Toronto from blowing up. I got to go. I got the green light to go. It was red before. So I need you to fix this. Deuces. Hit the green button. Because also the ways like the green button, like the button wouldn't turn green until she did what she was supposed to do. So it's like I don't think she could have stolen him, even though I want her to. I don't think La'an could have stolen him and still been able to go home. So it's like, I need you to do this for me. Right. So that the moment the button was green, she pressed it, went home. Or Back to the Future. She goes to the bridge to make sure everything's good. She sees Pelia, this little wink. What's up? What's going on? And then we find out when she goes back to her room, that there is a section of Starfleet in the future that deals with time, with keeping the timeline correct. And that was a gentleman we met in the very beginning. Because in the beginning, we didn't really know who we met or where did this guy come. Like, he could have been from the past for all we know. Like we never knew who he was. And now we find out that he's actually was from the future, was sent to the past to stop Kirk's timeline from happening. It gives you a headache if you think about it too much. But what did you think of finding out there's a whole new like section of Starfleet in the future?
Oh, I am intrigued by that. I know that there's time travel that that the Federation is trying to limit because folks are using it for bad and not for good, right? And so there's always evildoers everywhere. So we know that from Discovery that it became illegal, and they were trying to prevent people to do it. But that means you have to have a governing board to oversee that. I started to see that little device that they had, that the Department of Temporal Investigations had. I felt like that was a little really close to Loki. I felt like I had seen something like that before. And so she took that back because she didn't want any evidence left behind. However, the watch is still in Leanne's possession. And it's a broken watch, but it'll be interesting to see if later Pelia and Leanne have a discussion about the watch. Now Leanne is collecting things from her past missions. I was also wondering if once Leanne returned to the bridge, if there was going to be some sort of nod or wink from Pelia, but there was no visual. I don't know. There's nothing that stood out to me, but if they had known each other hundreds of years ago, then this could change a lot. Pelia knows a lot more than we obviously know. They met.
This is going to be I guess, learning. It's like one of the things where it's like, I know something, but I can't talk about it, like how Spock can't talk about his sister anymore.
Right.
Because even when she calls Captain, like Kirk, he's not a captain yet, but when she calls Lieutenant Kirk and it's like trying to have a conversation with him, he's not the same Kirk that she knew. Like you can tell, even the way the actor is playing him is a lot lighter, more fun, jovial Kirk than the one that we just met in this episode. And it's like she just needs to like make sure he was alive, but at the same time, it's just like her friend or the guy she just maybe just fell in love with in one episode is actually no longer there. And so it's La'an is feeling a lot of emotions that she has sort of like tried to stop herself from. And she never felt like she probably could have, because she always said people were hard. And so she just never allowed herself to get close. And like the one person she did allow to get close no longer exists. And it's just like, where does she go from this?
Do you think that's why she was crying at the end of the episode?
Yes.
Okay.
The one person
love
she got
loss,
close to.
potential love, a love loss. She felt a sense of importance and she wasn't lonely then, or
it may not even be love. It just may be that connection. Because if it's hard for someone to really connect with other people and you meet someone that you can connect with, regardless of the fact that you're romantically involved with them, but it's like if you lose that connection and you're just like, you related to me. Because that Kirk had grown up in a hostile territory. Like he was like on guard a little bit, even though he was like a little playful here and there. It's like he had a rougher backstory. He understood, like she could sort of be her rough self, and it was like acceptable with him. And everyone else who grew up in a utopia doesn't really get that. But La'an has faced horrors of being in a Gorham ship, of being like mercilessly bullied throughout her childhood. So she is not a happy-go-lucky person like a lot of other people on the ship was. And so she met someone who she really connected with, and he no longer exists. So I think it wasn't even like the loss of love. It was just a loss of a friend. Like I went from having no one to having someone to having no one again.
Got it. Part of me was also thinking like she had just gone through a lot of stress, a lot of trauma there.
I did heavily, and I am looking forward to seeing where, like, again, I like that this season doesn't really have, like, we know that in the background there's like a Gorn ship like that could like pop off, but like I like that this season doesn't really have a direction yet, and I'm just enjoying every episode for what it is and not how it connects. So though for this one I would like a little something more between that Kirk and this La'an. It would be great if like that Kirk, if something in the timeline happened again, and then that Kirk came onto this version of the Enterprise and saw La'an. I don't know. He died, so I don't think it's gonna happen. But you know, so it's Star Trek. Anything can happen.
But we know for sure that La'an doesn't persist through the Enterprise. Sometimes she either leaves or something happens to her. She doesn't have plot armor. So I was worried about her character, not so much Kirk, because the franchise is built on his character. Mm-hmm. So at least the Kirk we know in this timeline should persist. So it's interesting to see all that. Once again, here's another episode without a B story. There was enough action there so that I didn't fall asleep this time. I wasn't completely bored. However, I like those other dynamics, and I didn't have to see that the red Mustang and some other scenes that were in there. So overall, like it was okay for me.
Any final thoughts before we end this episode?
I hope we find out more about Pelia.
I would like an episode about her life. I would. I feel like it would be fun. That actress is amazing. I love every time she's on my screen, she brings whatever character she is playing to life. And I would love to see her reenact like her history.
She can die. It's just she's never been in a situation in which like a bullet has hit her.
In the wrong spot. Oh no.
Yeah, she should have given them a bulletproof vest.
Well, I'm just looking forward to more of this season because it's fun. It's relaxing. Like, it's not a turn off my brain show, but like I love that it doesn't really have to connect. I don't have to remember everything from like episodes before for this to make sense. So I just can't wait to see more. And as always, I'm Andrea.
And I'm Moneca.
And live long and prosper.